So I'm going to start with, oops, if my screen will move on, I'm going to start, there we go, with a little bit about myself, for those who don't know me so well. And at this point, I'll apologise if my voice is a bit flat. I seem to have picked up this flu bug that's going around, but I'm assured that none of you can catch it across the internet. So other than my voice being a bit flat, and possibly me having to take a few breaks to take a drink of water, it shouldn't affect us too much. Anyway, my name is Fiona Hayes. And I've had a fairly varied career. I worked in the fitness industry in the UK just as it started to grow, and such things just as weight training and circuit training and running were just beginning to be counted as valid activities for a woman alongside aerobics. I ran a small independent gym for a while and then became a trainer of fitness instructors and an international presenter in that industry and an author, so having three books published and quite a few magazine articles. And then I set up a small software company, writing software for personal trainers and sports coaches. I was for a time chairperson of the national governing body of fitness just about the time that they were deciding the standards and qualifications, and we were creating the MVQs in fitness and the Register of Exercise Professionals. I then left the fitness industry and went travelling. My degree is in behavioural psychology, and I found as I travelled that I was very interested in culture, and especially in leadership culture. Since that time, I became the first certified integral coach certified by ICC in Europe, and applied my knowledge of integral theory, leadership culture and coaching to organisations and coaching executives, looking at how and when to audit the culture of organisations and developing and implementing strategic plans for transforming or growing a brand through its people. So this is my email at the bottom here, and also I would like to invite you all to link with me through LinkedIn. My organisation that I now run is called Orion Initiatives, and we work with organisations to help them to build a culture that fully supports their brand. Now, on the call today, we have a variety of organisations ranging from those that would be counted as small to medium-sized enterprises to corporations with multiple divisions. And that's just fine, because whilst culture is a very abstract concept, it is one that's important, whatever the size of the organisation and wherever it is in its life history. So it should be important to leaders in all organisations. If we fail to pay attention to the culture, we fail to fully understand what is going on in our organisations, especially in today's multicultural and diverse workplace, because the rules of the social order are different in different parts of the organisation. They're different in different divisions, and often they're different even in different departments and teams. If we want to get along with each other, if we want to work well together, if we want to balance stability and progress, then we must pay attention to the culture and to the elements that influence culture and the influence that we as leaders can have on the culture. So in this webinar, we're going to look firstly at what culture is and why it's important in our businesses, and the effect that leaders can have on organisational culture. There's a huge amount to learn about culture and leadership, and far more than can be covered in one webinar, but hopefully this will give you a taster and some ideas of where digging deeper will be of help in your organisation. National, ethnic, occupational, organisational and microsystems all affect the culture. So culture is how things are done around here, the rules of the social order, both explicit and unspoken rules. It's a reflection of how we see the world and therefore how we respond to whatever is going on around us. Or more accurately, it's a reflection of how any group view the world, make sense of it and make order of it. So each of us individually reflect a culture that is filtered through our own experiences, viewed through our own lens of interpretation. This lens that we filter through is influenced by our family background and the country we grew up in. So, for instance, one person who grew up in a very privileged family may believe that starting part way up the corporate ladder when they start work is normal and is their right, whereas someone from a much less privileged family may consider that you have to earn the right to climb the ladder and work hard to get there. A friend of mine from South Africa has a very relaxed attitude to timekeeping, often multitasking and changing meeting times, reflecting the often relaxed attitude to appointments in that country. Take another friend of mine from Germany, and he is a very strict timekeeper, considering it a huge slight if you are late for a meeting. And these types of filters run in our background all the time. If you just sit for a while and think, you'll be able to list the family culture filters and the national culture filters that affect how you make sense of the world. These will inevitably affect how you react or respond to different things happening around you at work. As an example of these family culture filters, they show up when you start dating seriously or you get married. Then you'll find that there are cultural differences in the expectations from each family. Take the Christmas tradition. In my brother's family, they follow his wife's tradition of getting up in the morning on Christmas Day and opening all the Christmas presents straight away, first thing in the morning. Whilst in my family, we follow my parents' tradition of opening a few at a time throughout the day and making them last. Just slightly different ways of doing it. But different ways of making sense of the world, and our sense-making lenses run constantly, affecting how we see the world around us and how we interpret it. Now, multiply all these different sense-making lenses by the number of people in your workplace, and you have huge diversity. Add to this that we also filter related to our educational background, to the norms of our chosen profession, to the views and expectations of our peers, through our past experience and work history and stories that are passed on to us. And the diversity in the filtering lenses is multiplied again and again. And all of this will affect the culture that we're trying to operate in. In one company I worked with recently, a mantra in the company was, do the hard work to make the selling easy. The vision that this brought up in my head when I first heard it was one of long hours and working at weekends with very little time off, very little time for myself. However, this was filtered through my experience of working in a business setting where working long hours was rewarded not by extra pay or bonus, but by the expressed admiration of the leaders who made it very clear that those who were willing to put in the extra time were favoured over those who valued their free time. I was also filtering through belonging to a family of entrepreneurs, all individual consultants who worked when the work came in and at the behest of the client. And this often involved working through weekends and evenings rather than managing the client expectations of when a job could be completed. The mantra of do the hard work to make the selling easy was espoused by a marketing company. This, in fact, did not relate at all to long hours and no free time, but to smart marketing. When they talked about doing the hard work, they were talking about smart marketing and relationship building that set up the customer to make the purchase, made the selling easy. The mantra had originated at the top of the organisation, but now it had become part of the language. Everyone on the inside was in the know and understood the meaning. The meaning that was that the time spent working on innovative and creative smart marketing on a consistent basis was the number one priority because it made the selling easy. So time spent every day on the work of marketing the brand was sacrosanct. Nothing was allowed to interfere with this activity. It had become part of the culture, and the phrase of the mantra was now part of the language. Language is an important part of culture. And unless we start to understand the culture or the social order in a company and the forces operating in the various different groups, then some of the actions or reactions to events or activities and some of the language even will be puzzling to us, and we may misinterpret, as I originally did with this. Another company I worked in was a soft fruit producer who brought in large numbers of migrant workers through the fruit picking months. So they'd start bringing them in about May, right the way through till the end of September. Now, most of these migrant workers came from Eastern Europe and stayed for about 4 to 5 months and then went home again. And initially, the company paid them piecemeal, each picker being paid for every tray of fruit they picked. Mostly, the teams picked constantly through the whole of a shift, though they didn't know how much they would be paid until the end of the week. However, the UK law changed around that time, and the company had to pay them the minimum wage, the minimum hourly wage. And so in order to incentivize them, the company set up a bonus scheme for all the fruit that they picked over a certain volume. The threshold was set slightly lower than the average amount of fruit picked when the workers worked piecemeal. To the company's surprise, the productivity went down. In fact, people were not even reaching the threshold that they regularly reached when they were paid piecemeal. But because of the UK law, they had to be paid the minimum hourly wage. They couldn't go back to the old system. So the company had to think this through and think again, because it was clear that the bonus scheme simply didn't work. Now, looking at the exchange rates at that time with Eastern Europe, along with the minimum wage in the UK, it could easily be seen that even without any bonus, these migrant workers were earning far more for the 4 to 5 months of the year that they were working here than they would in their own home country. So the question was how to incentivize them to pick more. And the answer came when looking at the activities of these picking teams when they weren't working. The company had set up a five-a-side football pitch and a volleyball pitch in the camp that housed the workforce. And this workforce rapidly organised themselves into single nationality teams, and they were highly competitive. Transferring this competitiveness into the picking fields by arranging teams of 8 pickers, all of one nationality, and setting up a league table of which teams were most productive soon pushed the productivity up well beyond the bonus threshold. The results were far more related to a culture of international competition that soon began to thrive than to the possibility of extra earnings, although they did still get their bonus. Now, year after year, as the story of last year's league table winners was relayed to newcomers, the competitive culture was nurtured, and year after year, the picking productivity benefited. So, what is culture? Well, it's how we do things around here. It's a reflection of how we see the world, filtered through our own background, which includes the family background, our educational background, our chosen profession. Different personalities suit different professions, our current peers, our past experiences, and stories that are passed on. Culture implies some level of structural stability in the group. When we say that something is cultural, we mean that it's not only shared, but that it defines the group. As humans, we like to have a sense of group identity that enables us to belong. So our culture is a major stabilizing force that we won't give up or change easily. It provides meaning and predictability, and most of all, it provides a way of organizing, a way of getting things done. The physical surroundings of an organisation and how members interact with each other and with customers and visitors tells us much about the thought patterns and the belief systems in the organisation. For instance, in one business I worked in, the executive team have individually marked parking spaces near to the front door, whereas there are no visitor spaces, and so visitors have to often walk quite a few hundred yards after parking. Whereas in another company that I'm currently working in, they have visitor spaces right beside the front door so that visitors don't get cold or wet in bad weather. The first company is quite hierarchical, that's what I'm trying to say. The culture in this company is that the boss is very important and should not be challenged. And this has a very strong effect on how people organise. The first company also have a separate corridor for the executive offices, and all these offices have doors which are kept closed. Their belief is that the executive work is important work and they should not be disturbed. Each exec has a PA and you cannot get to see that exec without booking an appointment with a PA. In the second company, however, there are no closed offices for the execs. They work in open plan with the rest of the people. The belief here is that they need to be an integral part of what is going on. In this company, it's common to meet with the exec at their desk. Although there are bookable meeting rooms available for presentations, etc., it's also common for the exec to be interrupted by someone needing some information or help, even though they're in a meeting. These two separate ways of accessing the executive time is an example of how the belief systems prevalent in the company create different behaviours and actions. One is not necessarily better or worse than the other, but they are both artifacts of the culture and indicators of how the work gets done in that environment and how decisions are made. Leadership has a massive effect on culture. The leadership assumptions of how things should be done can create groupthink, group beliefs, group language, group and individual behaviours. So in the first company I spoke of, for instance, information gathering was very formal and set meetings with different members of the executive were used to pass on information. Where there was a particular challenge or issue to be resolved, it was brought to the executive attention at the meeting, often along with a proposed solution, but no action that required a move away from the accepted way of doing things would be started until the executive approval was given. This kept a high degree of stability within the organisation, but also it often extended the time frame for action to be taken, making the company slow to respond to changes in the marketplace. When people saw an opportunity or a possible way to approach a challenge, they spent a massive time carefully preparing their pitch to get approval. The cultural norm was to write a paper, distribute it around the meeting participants, who in theory would all have read it, and then turn up to the meeting. But if for any reason the meeting was postponed or something apparently more important or higher up in the pecking order took precedence and the proposed solution to the challenge didn't get discussed, then it had to wait until the next scheduled meeting, quite often at least a month away. So this often made it incredibly slow to meet challenges, and it's also set the group belief that no one other than the executive team were authorised to make decisions. Even actions to meet quite small challenges were pushed upwards, with the result that the executive was completely overloaded. Now, the organisation recognising this created a second layer of directors below the top execs to agree the less vital decisions, and this dissipated the problem across more directors, allowing things to happen more rapidly whilst keeping stable the group belief that only the top people could make the decisions and keeping the hierarchy intact. I was looking to see where this culture had come from, and it seems to have started many years previously when, in a turnaround situation, the CEO who took over at that time required that every decision should be run by him. His view was that he knew the financial agenda and the financial environment, and he was best placed to make the decisions. Also, he'd been put in place to turn this business around, and so the buck stopped with him. At this time, the business had been much smaller, less than 250 people, but now it had grown into a company with different business units operating in different markets and 10,000 plus people working there. Most people didn't know why the decision-making was done in this way, and they didn't challenge it. They simply accepted that this is the way things were done around here. It had become the embedded culture. Now, in contrast to that, an internet technology company I worked with in Russia organised themselves around project teams and roles. The teams were typically very small and contained diverse skills, and they took on one project at a time. The power to make decisions related to that project lay totally with the team, who, rather than requiring a well-researched paper arguing the case for a decision, would simply seek to quickly understand the problem, listen to the solution, and ask the question, can I state any reason why this solution would not work, at least for the moment? If they came up with no reason that it would not work, then they implemented it on the proviso that they could revisit that decision at any time. No solution was written in blood, and no one was punished if the solution failed. It was taken as a learning point, and the challenge was then just revisited. Any member of the team could call for a meeting at any time. Now, this kept the teams very agile and flexible. However, it requires a very different type of group think to my first example. In this team, the whole team were accountable for the success of the project and took responsibility. Lots of new things were tried and failed, and many others were tried and succeeded, and all were seen as learning. Sometimes rapid progress was made, other times progress was slower, and the team or the individuals within the team would feel under huge pressure to finish the project on time. Lots of conversations were had in the kitchen or at lunch while people tried to persuade others that their solution could work. Sometimes a team member would start working on something only to find that at the next meeting the decision was revisited and there was a change in direction and all the work that they had done was set aside. Very frustrating for them at times, and this led to the team feeling pressure from an apparent lack of stability, though when I talked with them they mostly said, but I have to admit we do get things done around here and it never gets boring. Now, if we go back to the first company I mentioned, the frustration came from not being able to move fast enough, not being able to try anything or change a decision without a massive research and putting into presenting a paper that was often never read. And quite often their argument was often shot down by the executive who hadn't read the paper, and that was also frustrating for them. The technology company used the term dynamic steering, taken from holacracy, to describe their fast decision-making, although they didn't use the whole of holacracy. And I introduced this concept to one of the business units in the more hierarchical company, just into one of the business units, not the whole company. They picked up on the language and started to use it in discussions of why their system didn't work when a rapid response was needed. So this one small unit started to build their own form of dynamic steering to change the pace of decision making. This was quite a brave move by one of the unit executive leader who was willing to give up his assumption that he was the only one who could responsibly make decisions. And he set parameters for decision making that he didn't need to get involved in. It still took a little while though until the group belief changed and they started to make decisions without waiting for a meeting with him. And for quite a long time, they kept their new decision-making process very quiet, only speaking about it within their own unit. They were afraid that it wouldn't be acceptable within the wider group. And in fact, one other business unit that we tried to introduce that into, the group exec said, this is only going to work to the extent that I will give up control. And he didn't actually implement it. So why is culture important? In the company where there were no visitor spots near the door and the suppliers were allotted a limited time by the PA, there was a feeling of needing to pitch and of having to have thought through solution before going in. For me as a supplier, the advantage of this was that I was always very well prepared, having researched the business thoroughly. The disadvantage was that sometimes what I'd researched wasn't the burning platform of the moment, and so despite thinking I was well prepared, I was in fact going into the meeting, filtering what I was hearing through my extensive preparation and thought through solution to something that was no longer important. The feeling was always very formal, and it took me some time to build up the relationship enough to have the confidence to go in with no thought-through solution and simply ask questions until I had a better understanding of what the burning platform was and then go away and research the solution. As with much of their decision making, this was often slow, and it could take months or even years before a solution to a problem was started. And this, as you can imagine, had a knock-on effect with customers. Staff often felt they had no way of meeting customer needs immediately because the perception was that even for small decisions, they had to go through the hierarchy to get approval. Quite often, they didn't even bother. Challenging that methodology by bringing in the dynamic steering concept in this one small business unit challenged the basic assumptions of the group, and thus it threatened the stability of the group. The how we do things around here was now in flux, and this created a good deal of anxiety and defensiveness of the old stable system. Timing plays an important role in this. There are specific times in the life of a company where the culture is formed or changed, often quite radically. In founder companies, the culture is strongly aligned with the belief systems, thoughts, and cultural lenses of the founder. How he or she, as leader, reacts in various situations embeds the behaviours of the company. Particularly, how he or she responds to challenge or to crisis will set the group assumptions that lay down the norms for the future. If the founder is intolerant of untidiness, then a strict enforcing of a clear desk policy may become the norm. If the founder is in work before 9 every day and checks his or her watch as people arrive, a strict time of arrival may become the norm. If, when anyone challenges something, the founder encourages discussion and is open to listening and possibly modifying their actions, then a culture of bringing ideas and challenging them will be embedded. However, if when anyone challenges something that the founder says, they're immediately closed down or even ridiculed, then a culture of not challenging a superior, even when you can see the problems with the suggestion, will arise. The leader's actions in this regard speak louder and longer than words. I worked with a very dynamic and energetic divisional leader who stated that he welcomed challenge and new ideas. However, my observation was that in meetings, people did not bring new ideas or challenge his ideas, and even when asked to give their opinion, would always agree with him. We talked about this and noted that he had inherited this culture from his predecessor, the founder, who always stated that he was open to ideas, but in fact never acted on ideas brought to him and often became aggressively defensive when his ideas were challenged. The new leader had to adopt a policy of stating the problem and asking for possible solutions and holding back, often for a considerable time, whilst repeating the request for solutions, while people unlearned the old behaviour of not bringing their ideas forth and learned that it was safe to both bring forth ideas and also to discuss and challenge ideas. As new companies grow, the culture so strongly influenced by the founder may no longer work. So early growth is often a very destabilizing period, one where understanding what is happening in the culture is paramount to leadership, especially if that early growth is rapid growth. As the company reaches midlife, founders have to relinquish operational control, and this is a difficult time for the founder who, even if the new leadership is a member of the family or a long-serving trusted employee, the founder has to relinquish assumptions of how things should be done around here. That's quite often difficult for them. Next, as companies mature into midlife, often finding themselves under new leadership, they undergo transition to new ways of doing things. Conflicts over which elements of the embedded culture employees like and which they don't like often arise, and these often consolidate into what the employee liked about the old leadership and what the employees don't like about the new leadership or do like about the new leadership. So that can set up conflict. A study published by the Harvard Business Review reported that optimal tenure length for a CEO in the corporate world is 4.8 years. They said that early on, when new execs are getting up to speed, they seek information in diverse ways, turning to both external and internal company sources, and this deepens their relationships with customers and employees alike. But as CEOs accumulate knowledge and become entrenched, they rely more on their internal networks for information, growing less attuned to market conditions. And because they have more invested in the company now, they favour avoiding losses over pursuing gains. Their attachment to the status quo makes them less responsive to consumer preferences. Thus, the board often replace the CEO after about 5 years, especially in fast-moving markets. Because with new leadership comes the opportunity to change, either subtly or more radically, the underlying assumptions about how things are done around here and how we should behave. However, CEO tenure also has a positive and linear association with firm employee relationship strength, and so this relatively short tenure for leadership can have an unsettling effect for the employees, bringing its own challenges. Challenges also arise with succession planning. Often CEOs will systematically promote people from one of the organisational subcultures, so biasing the organisational culture as a whole. For instance, a leader whose background is in technology is likely to favour the technology subculture, which tends to seek to cut out human error by systemising everything. Whereas a leader whose background is in marketing will often favour employees from this subculture, employees who are outward-facing and moving with the market, but are less sensitive to the need for systems that support the business fully. In some instances, there can be a mismatch then between the promises made to the customers and the efficiency with which those promises are carried out because of a lack of rigour in the back office systems and the admin support. As a company continues and ages, often it starts to decline and it may move into a turnaround situation, with once again different leadership introducing different cultural norms, or possibly the company moves into a phase of mergers and acquisitions where quite different cultures are brought together, and once again the challenge is to keep what elements of belief, values and behaviours are good for the future of what is extensively now a new company. In all of these situations, how leadership behaves, the assumptions that people in leadership decisions hold, where they gather their information from, how they make the decisions, how they work with their cultural norms and the subcultures has a profound effect on the development of the business. In extreme cases, the leader's personality can be so strongly stamped on the culture and subcultures that it seriously affects the brand reputation. Take the realisation of Ryanair boss Michael O'Leary. In September 2013, Ryanair was voted the worst of the 100 biggest brands in the UK market in terms of customer relationships by readers of Consumer Magazine, which Ryanair boss was accused of perpetrating a bullying culture which translated into unsympathetic treatment of customers. And it even led to Mr. O'Leary himself receiving abuse by customers who had experienced this on a flight with Ryanair when he was dining out. And this didn't just happen once, it happened regularly. It didn't mean, though, that Mr. O'Leary decided to change the culture until the airline started to lose market share. Then he started to take note. One of the complaints I often hear from companies is that somehow silos have developed and that this is stopping the different parts of the business working together in a true collaboration. Often these silos are either openly or subtly competing against each other, so actively withholding information or withholding much needed resource from each other. Often each silo has a different subculture. Sometimes there are subcultures in different product sets. If these different product sets are differentiated into business units, these different business units can attract quite different kinds of people with quite different beliefs and values, such as a food company who've developed a health division and so has created a conflict related to whether the decisions are made on what foods sell easily or what foods are better for health. The belief systems in each of these differentiated product sets is different based on different values and different desired outcomes. Or another example, a construction company who has branched out into servicing public sector buildings and maintaining them. The customers for this new division of the business are very different, and thus the mindset to service those customers is different. And even the language they speak is different. Different interactions with the customers lead to different shared experiences and a different culture. Take, for instance, pharmaceutical companies developing products for sale to farmers. They employ research scientists, but research scientists don't speak the language of farmers. The sales and marketing side, therefore, with their local subcultures that can interact with the farmers, becomes vital to the life of the business. But quite often, sales and marketing is not highly regarded by academics, research scientists. So one of the most important tasks of leadership is to find different ways of coordinating all the subcultures. The leader who gets this right, or even the leader who takes it seriously enough to pay attention to it and allocate time and resource to it, is doing their business a great service. In the end, culture equals brand equals culture. Culture equals brand equals culture. It's the customers who decide the brand, not the brand designer. If the customer interacts with your people and finds that they keep their promises, then your brand will be deemed reliable. If the customer interacts with your people and finds them polite and helpful, then this reputation becomes part of your brand. Culture and brand are inextricably linked, both in the mind of the customer and in the mind of the potential employee. Employee brand is also culture. How the subcultures interact and how employees are treated reflects totally on how they will behave with the suppliers and with customers, as in the Ryanair example. So once you've decided how you want the culture to develop, that is, what are the values and behaviours that predominate and that inform all the decision making and that you want to become known for, how do you embed this culture in the business? There are 6 primary embedding mechanisms. Visible artifacts of the climate or the organisation, what the leaders pay attention to, measure and control, reward and deal with systematically, their relation to organisational crises, their deliberate role modelling and teaching and coaching, how they allocate rewards and status, and how they select, recruit, promote, and even excommunicate people. So let's take the visible artifacts, the visible artifacts of the climate of the organisation. These can range from environmental surroundings in the office to artifacts for internal communication, e.g. do we use internet or intranet, to the robustness of the processes and the infrastructures that support the desired behaviours, all sorts of things. NAP pharmaceutical offices located in Cambridge, UK at the Science Park, the Science Park in Cambridge in the UK, NAP state that they are committed to equality, inclusion and accessibility, and their offices have been designed with their core values in mind. Their core values are innovation, people focus, honesty and respect, drive and passion, and intellectual capability. Everyone there works in open plan areas with varied breakout spaces that encourage collaboration and exchange of ideas. This actually reaches their core value of innovation. There are, however, flexible enclosed spaces available for quiet working or private meetings, and that reaches their core value of respect. Deloitte in Johannesburg use blueprints to communicate the DNA of the organisation. In the foyer of their head office are large ceramic models. There you can see them on the wall. These are icons that depict the things that they want to do more of and the things that they want to do less of. And they're up there in the on the wall of the large foyer. So here you'll see the icons at the very top here put into a formula that equals Deloitte. So there are things above the line, numerators, and things that are below the line that are denominators. And each one of these artifacts is stated in words and depicted in icons, clearly communicating the aspects of the culture. These stated words are the words of the employees themselves. and the icons were decided by the employees themselves. So these are the aspects of the culture that Deloitte holds dear, and they're used in all aspects of the business. For instance, the process of welcoming and orienting new employees is created around this formula. That one was one of the above the line ones. This is one of the below the line ones, the denominators. Now, Professor Edgar Schein's research on guiding an organisation through cultural transformation showed that this also requires unlearning as well as learning. It's not enough to define what behaviours are required to achieve the strategy. The behaviours that need to be unlearned and cannot be tolerated also need to be defined. The blueprint system used by Deloitte takes this on board and works on both those aspects that need to be encouraged and those aspects that need to be stamped out. What the leadership pays attention to and measures is a clear way of embedding aspects of the culture. And in Deloitte South Africa, this cultural DNA is not only used in communication and orienting new employees, but is measured quarterly and forms part of the quarterly reports and reported with the financial data. So it's paid attention to very regularly. If you're interested in knowing more about this, you can look at www.blue-prints.com and you'll get more information there. Or if you get in touch with me, I can also give you a lot more information on that. So back to how leaders affect culture. Becoming systematic in paying attention to something becomes a very powerful way of sending a message. Building this cultural DNA into the system thoroughly embeds the desired behaviours. Leadership, however, must also be consistent in their own behaviour, especially in how they relate to organisational crises, where often the tendency is to react rather than respond. In this aspect, consistency is far more important than intensity in embedding culture. What leaders notice and comment on, and their casual remarks and questions consistently geared to a certain area, are soon taken note of as how they allocate regard and status. So one of the most important things leaders can do is to pay attention to their own development and understanding of what drives their behaviours and their language, and whether they are reacting or responding to things. As well as the 6 primary mechanisms for embedding a culture, there are a number of secondary mechanisms. Organisational design and structure, organisational systems and procedures, rites and rituals, design of the physical space, stories about important events and people, formal statements of organisational philosophy, creed and charters. A hierarchical design creates a different culture to a flat structure, and the systems and procedures and how strongly these are adhered to is often linked with that design. Stories in businesses about people and events abound and are often skewed to emphasise one or more aspects of the culture. However, remember, how we hear these stories is filtered through our own history, culture, beliefs and values. So if we're working in a business to help them change, we must be aware of this and not jump to conclusion based on our own filters. Okay, so where next? I've put here a few of the books. There are many, many good books on the market. And I've put here a few of them that I think provide a variety of approaches to leadership and culture. I'm sure most of you will have many more recommendations. I picked these particularly because, for instance, The New Leaders by Daniel Goleman builds on the work that he did on emotional intelligence and links leadership with the results that are found in a business. First Among Equals, David Maister, actually looks at managing professionals who have similar peer values. So where you've got professional services firms, this looks at how do you manage those people who, from an intellectual perspective, have very, very similar levels of development. Tribal leadership looks at leveraging natural groups in order to build thriving organisations. That's an interesting one. Robert Keegan's The Evolving Self very much looks at your own development and the levels of consciousness development within individuals and therefore also within an organisation. And The Soul of a Business looks at how do you manage for profit as well as sticking to your values and your ethics and your morals. There's also a wealth of information on the internet. As well as that, I'll be shortly launching a series of modules in the above topics, in these topics: knowing yourself as a leader and how you make decisions, create change and embed the culture, mapping the current culture, developing purpose, vision and values, building a strategy for cultural development and change, aligning all the work to be done with the goals and direction. That's an important one. Brand culture. And number 7, around Michael's kitchen table, is a planned interactive discussion with Michael Wolff and Robin Hamer. Now, Robin's a Himalayan mountain leader who specialises in helping groups to learn how to learn, to understand the psychology inherent in learning, and to respect that each person is an expert in their own learning. He also uses complexity framework to describe how looking at natural living systems can inform organising a business in a way which is fundamentally different from the rather traditional ways that we have of organising businesses, which tend to be influenced by metaphors of the clock and the machine. Michael Wolff is often called the father of modern branding. He's the co-founder of the brand company Wolff Olins. Wolff Olins is one of the world's most iconic design companies. And he doesn't work there anymore. He now works as Michael Wolff and Company, and he works with clients from around the world as a designer and creative advisor. He's also a visiting professor at Central St Martin's, the University of Arts in London, and at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology in Cape Town, South Africa. He's a senior fellow at the Royal College of Arts, and he's a UK faculty of Royal Designers for Industry, and he's the inclusive design champion for the UK government. One of his fundamental beliefs is that in order to build a brand, you have to pay attention to the culture, as it's your employees, your suppliers, and your customers who ultimately decide what your brand stands for. We often meet around Michael's kitchen table, sometimes with others as well, in a thought leadership incubator, and we decided that it would be useful to open up these meetings via the internet using the technology that's now available to bring others into discussions. So if you'd like to be part of those discussions and you want to know more about this, just put your name into the chat, or if we already have your email, we will send you details of them as they come up anyway. So with that, it just leaves me to remind you that if we don't have your email, write it into the chat box now and we'll pick it up. And if we do, then we'll send you the recording of this along with any details of anything future for your perusal. With that, it just remains for me to thank you all for being here, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Oh, one last thing. Fiona.hayes@orioninitiatives.com. You can get hold of me, and if you have any questions that have come in, we will email you, or you can email them to us. Now, I suggest that when you write Orion Initiatives, you write Orion and then Initiatives, and then put them together as Orion Initiatives. If I had realised when I named the company how difficult writing Orion Initiatives would be, I'd have probably named it differently, but there you go. Thank you very much for your time, everybody, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. Bye for now.